Okay, I think we're live now. This is Journeys in Podcasting, and it's a Monday afternoon here in Bogota, and I believe for the guys in Beijing, they're just getting up. We're going to be talking about learning space today, and these guys have a really good philosophy that they've developed called the 5 Spaces of Learning. I'll let them introduce themselves and go right ahead. And just a quick note for anyone who's on that hasn't done Hangouts before. If it starts jumping around, the video starts jumping around, just turn your mic off when you're not talking, and that'll kind of keep the video more stationary. So who's online here? Let's do a quick go-around, and then we'll jump into the 5 Spaces of Learning.
I'm Nathaniel. I'm a teacher at Western Academy of Beijing, and very interested in learning spaces.
And hi everybody, I'm Dylan. I'm also teaching in Beijing. And Nat and I work together on the website, and we're really happy to be here today. Thank you.
Joe, Diego, you guys want to introduce yourselves real fast?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Joe Koss. I'm a secondary social studies teacher down in Uruguay in the Uruguayan American School. I also kind of play around with some makerspace instruction, and we're just undergoing an addition to our secondary high school, and I've been really involved in pushing the learning design of our expansion at our school.
Great, thank you, Joe, Nathaniel, and Dylan. My name is Diego. I'm a technology teacher here in Bogota at CNG. Chris and I work together in this podcast and carrying out different projects, taking into account tech integration and discussions and learning spaces. So very glad to have you guys on with us today. So I don't know, Chris, you want to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I'll just pass it straight to Daniel and Dylan. I'm sorry, Nathaniel and Dylan. And yeah, we'd love to hear just kind of a brief overview of what are the 5 spaces of learning.
Sure. So I guess the theory kind of was developed over a period of time. When I first got to the Western Academy of Beijing, it's kind of known within the region, I think, as being quite a beautiful campus, quite an aesthetically pleasing campus. And when I got here, I thought the same thing. But over time working in this school, you know, the school was already about 12 years old at the time, 10 years old at the time, and some of just the general functionality of the space didn't really meet how the teaching and learning was really going on. And so we started to talk about this idea of just kind of renovating the space, or just bringing it back to its original kind of glory, and really focusing it on what it was as a space. And so over that time, I started to do a lot of research because I wanted to go and speak with my principal about an idea to kind of enhance it. And so over that time, I developed, through a number of kind of looking at what our students were doing and kind of just research within our own school, as well as kind of looking at best practice internationally, developed this idea of the 5 essential spaces. And the idea really comes from this concept of what are the kind of core things that happen in a classroom. And so the 5 essential spaces that we've kind of designed are this idea of a community space, the idea of private spaces, the idea of display spaces, the idea of presentation spaces, and then the 5th element is that virtual space, that real 21st century link. And I think traditional classrooms are really designed really solely around this idea of a presentation space. It's that kind of idea of the teacher being the holder of all knowledge, standing at the front of the room, that lectern style. And so really, a 21st century learning environment needs to do a lot more than that. It needs to be a much more dynamic space that allows our learners and our educators to work in different types of ways. So we think with those 5 broad categories, if you can identify those within your physical environment, that you'll have be able to really access and build a great environment for your students.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like you were looking at pedagogy that was going on in your school, and then you kind of pushed that into space design. I want to kind of touch on that topic later, but what I really want to jump into right now is how you guys referenced a George Couros post in one of your blogs, and it's weighing in space and time, and talking about like how time will always win over space, and that like how you arrange the time of your day, and how you arrange like how much time you spend in each topic. space becomes this structural variable, whereas time and space connected together with pedagogy become more of this like process variable that really go to the heart of our philosophies on teaching and learning. How do you deal with this in your class, this balance of space, time, pedagogy?
Time is always the great challenge, isn't it? There's never enough time. It doesn't matter, teachers will always say, well, if we had less of this part of the curriculum or less of that, maybe we'd have more time. And it doesn't matter. It's always going to be a pressure point, I think. But that doesn't mean we should give up on the concept. I think, there's been a lot of talk and research about the way that schools are designed, and that cells and bells model of physical classroom design, but also of the entire construct of education is really based around that industrial model of punch in, punch out, we do this discipline and it's not connected to this discipline. And so, we are fortunate that we work at a PYP school where there's a real focus on making our curriculum transdisciplinary, and that allows us to have much bigger senses of time, in the sense that for when we're in the homeroom, we have students go to some specialist classrooms, the performing arts or visual arts, but when we're in the homeroom, we're quite fortunate in the sense that we are not tied to identifying a specific given time. It's not like you must have 4 periods of mathematics, that are 80 minutes long in a week, or you must have. So teachers are given a lot of opportunity to just try and find authentic opportunities to connect the mathematics and real-world senses to what we're doing in what would maybe be termed social studies or sciences, or what we call the unit of inquiry. So in that sense, we're given these broad, flexible periods of time, usually 28 periods a week, where we're able to kind of just let students follow that pathway. Now, there's always going to be other constraints as well, because we have lunch hours and we have break times and we have assembly. There's always, and that's the difficult process of it, and that's what the heart of that one post was trying to talk about. Is that I think it really takes, even though we have this broad idea, I think that it takes going even deeper, because the whole system still is based around those bells. And so until we can get completely outside of that, which takes a massive leap on everyone's part, I think that's where the real challenge sticking point is.
Absolutely. I think that's the very interesting thing for us, I think, in our journey on the topic of learning spaces is it connects to everything. And so it's not just, I think a naive view is being interested in design or learning spaces, it's about buying new furniture. But the process that we've gone through, and I think the more that we read, we discover just how space and how thinking about space can challenge the status quo in so many different areas of education. Yeah.
I'm just kind of pausing to see if anyone else jumps in. That really jumps to another question about this idea of, in one of your blogs you talked about this idea of the introvert, and how there's so much focus now on the collaborative model in learning, and how, which is great if you're kind of a Vygotsky fan and you believe in the social construction of knowledge, which I think is a critical point. But at the same time, schools are really noisy places. I mean, it's really like brutal on the person who needs, an introverted space where they can process before going back to the group. How do you recommend balancing that through space, but also through, how you arrange your class where kids have opportunities to engage in both?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Nat wrote that blog post a couple of weeks ago, and I'll just jump in initially. But I think it's for me, I'm really curious about that whole idea, because when we started redesigning our spaces here, we started with the pedagogy. We started with asking teachers, how do you want to teach? And how do we build spaces that allow quality, progressive teaching to happen? And so everyone was like, it's collaboration, it's collaboration. Kids have to be working together, there's got to be visible thinking, there's going to be noise, it's going to be messy. But now, stepping back, that's like that whole idea of the introvert, and where individuals have time to think and space to think in schools and in classrooms. Really interesting idea. So,
I think the thing is, a lot of schools now that are being designed all want to go open plan. Open plan is back. It was funny, a few weeks ago we attended a Learning Spaces conference, and this director got up and he was talking about his new facility, and he said, well, the one thing I remember in education that was definitely going to be dead in the 1970s, so everyone said, well, open plan is dead. And now it's 2015, 16, and everyone wants open plan again. So what comes around goes around, I guess. And the thing is, there's a lot of articles out there, not so much about schools, although there was in the 70s and 60s that open plan was not working, but in office spaces where a lot of these kind of innovative ideas that schools are, this trickle-down effect from Google or from Lego or these big companies that have these innovative offices where people want to go and be and work. And it's really about creating an environment where people want to be. That's the whole kind of mission of designing physical spaces, is that they enhance the teaching and learning, but they also, you know, Dylan wrote an article about how can we measure the success of the spaces. And it's really in people's, you know, vote with your feet, how happy people are in the space. Do people want to be there? And I think that's the real tension point. But the one thing about these open plan models that they're finding in offices is that the production is going down. People aren't working as well because it is too cacophonous. And it's, how do you design a space that does both? And it is a difficult point. I think if you have a huge space, you can create zones. You know, you can create a quiet zone. You can create, if you're using kind of what we're physically in right now, which is a single cell classroom, perhaps we need to look at breakout spaces outside the classroom. Maybe it's about having space within your hallway that allow for respite or a quiet thinking space. So, and I also think it really requires also professional development for your teachers, and an ability for your teachers to understand and recognize the different types of learners. And, you know, we often have parents come in and say, oh, little Susie's quite shy. How can we make her not shy? How can we make her not shy? And, you know, it's, I don't know that we can make her not shy. And is that bad, you know? So I think, I mean, we don't want people to be terrified, but at the same time, we don't need to just force someone to be, you know, the class clown either. So I think both are kind of, it's a real difficult question to answer unless we know the physical restraints a specific space might have. It also depends on how you structure your day, how much time you might give for quiet thinking, how you value that as an individual teacher. So there's a lot of different things at play.
What about, you mentioned breakout spaces and alternative spaces. I'm thinking on other spaces to go. Like one thing we have played around with is having these kind of lab spaces that they're multidisciplinary, that any discipline can come in. I just started reading this book, Unflattening. I don't know if you guys know it, but the whole idea is these incredible strong visuals that you could literally approach from any discipline. And so what I'm dreaming of in a school is that you have something like this combined with space where, you know, you mentioned in PYP where you guys try to be transdisciplinary, to have strong visual metaphors that could be approached from multiple disciplines, but also to have school spaces that would have a way to go and interact with those metaphors, or just like an immersion experience that could be used across disciplines as well. Have you guys seen that, or have you played around with that at your school? I've seen a video at your school. It looks incredibly dynamic. I'm just wondering what else you have outside of the classrooms.
That sounds fascinating. I'll have to get that book. It kind of connects with what I was just thinking. You know, Nat started off by talking about the 5 essential spaces, and maybe I could throw this over to Diego maybe, and connecting with the introvert conversation as well, but going back to the idea of virtual space, and I wonder how we can leverage virtual space to support a broad diversity of learners. So, you know, online spaces for introverts, for Sally who's shy. And as you're saying, some of those visual metaphors, and so I'm curious about that. I don't know if anyone else would care to weigh in.
I mean, when you think about it, it all goes back to like the, you know, pedagogy parts of it, like what skills are you looking for to develop in, and, you know, what kind of students you have. Do you as a teacher think of all the, you know, learning styles of, you know, intelligences that your students might have, and then in that order, what do you generate for each of those? Does that make sense? Like, okay, at some point they will all have to interact and come together in this type of space for, these type of specific activity that will, give them these outcomes. But at a different point in time, they'll have to go work by themselves and, produce all by themselves in an individual manner. I would like to really know what you guys do in terms of those virtual, any core apps or anything you recommend for that, for having kids working online or outside of school, that type of thing.
One of the challenges we have with virtual spaces, obviously being in China, is dealing with the Great Firewall. So we are often bound by our own lack of, like, I often go to our IT and goes, like, let's do this. And he's like, we can't do this. So that's a constant kind of struggle. But, I think as a result, we've come up with some pretty creative options of ways of kind of getting around. We have a very robust blogging system, all done through WordPress. That's really been a dynamic virtual space for us. So basically, it sounds kind of, actually, it could sound very simple or rather confusing, but essentially there's a layer of blogs. So each homeroom will have their own blog, which would act as a digital schedule. And then as a grade level team, we all have our own contribution page, basically. So where we curate all the lessons or engagements or resources that we might want our students to access. And so on our grade level blog, which our students access, it might say, period 3, we're going to do this, and they click on a hyperlink, and that redirects them. The blogs look the same visually to the student; they're in the same place. But they go to this other blog underneath that's been created that just has reams of knowledge, and it would have everything from videos embedded, questions that students might, discussion questions they might have. If there's resources they might want to download, they're all embedded in there. And all it is a series of WordPress blogs it's all generated in-house. It's all housed on a local server, so we're not having issues with firewall and such things. So that's one thing that we've really found. There are some apps out there that we're able to use, but then there's other times where we come up with a great idea to use an app, and it doesn't work. So it's all those ways to work around certain things. We do have certain pipelines, but yeah, it's its own challenge.
I think certainly a feature for us is that blogging structure for sure, and especially I think in the early years, the kids use iPads a lot more than in the upper years. Upper years for us is a one-to-one laptop. And some teachers here developed an app which is well regarded and well used. It's called Easy Blog Junior. And the kids post literally tens of thousands of blog posts in an academic year. So that's probably the biggest structural support we have for those virtual spaces.
And for us as an international school, it becomes this great sharing point. So each student has their own blog as well where they post things. And there's a big culture of commenting and reading one another's blog and sharing ideas that way. And through everyone right down to the administration go on and comment on students' blog. Granny and Grandpa go on and comment on students' blog. So it keeps that dialogue for us going. So we do get that sense of being able to know where our students are at, and even if you are the quiet student who doesn't want to share, orally in the class, you do have that outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you mentioned in one of your blogs, Notosh. We just saw you and McIntosh speak at a conference in Lima called ASA conference, and he talks about the 7 spaces of learning, and then he talks about borrowing that from the 6 spaces of digital social medias. And so what we've been practicing is sort of trying to move back and forth and do training in the classroom using your wall spaces in ways that actually would train the kids for something like commenting on blogging. In our case, it was specifically for leaving feedback on Google Documents. When kids leave each other feedback on their writing, like what are some constructive ways to leave feedback? And so we practiced that like you have on your back wall behind you with Post-its and affinity grouping and like getting the kids to actually practice using it in physical space before moving into digital space. Do you find that the digital spaces help you in designing your physical spaces, or pedagogical tweaks and changes that you may see happening in digital space that you want to bring into your physical space? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think commenting, like, is such a great example of that, because we've gone we obviously use post-its and things like that to give feedback all the time. I'm not sure if you've ever seen, great video to watch, Austin's Butterfly, about the power of feedback. Really, really great resource to show kids at the start of the year to talk about, yeah, seeing thumbs up, and a really great resource. So, you know, that's a big starting point for us to start a year. And we've gone through different systems for commenting and for getting those kinds of results. For a long time, we used a protocol called PQP, Praise, Question, Polish, or Prompt. And the only problem with that is that it's such a time-consuming, like even as an educator trying to model that all the time, if you're going to try and make 22 blog post comments and you're trying to make them individual, it's so time-consuming. And so we've also moved to another model where we have kind of different prompts. It could be snippet, you know, and you might grab a piece of a comment and then quote that section and then respond to it. You might just be asking to ask a question. So because we're still with elementary school kids, we're kind of designing a lot of the time what that might look like. When it's blog comment, we might direct sometimes, choose from this menu, or specifically use this type of commenting style. But one of the big focuses obviously comes back to that Austin's Butterfly, and it's that idea of having kind, helpful, timely, and specific feedback. And so we really try and talk with our students about that, whether it's doing it physically on the walls or whether it is doing it on the blog. The walls are great because, like you said, we're able to directly then kind of pull those ones that are really strong off and say, hey, this is really beneficial to me and this isn't. We also will have students sometimes take their work and look at the comments and remove the things that say, you know, this doesn't give me any directive or support any next step for me. This isn't a useful comment. So by doing that as well physically, they're able to understand, you know, what would make a good comment, hopefully, when they do that next time.
Like critical consumers.
Yeah.
I've seen, I'm just recalling, I came into Nat's classroom earlier this year, and they had all the tables flipped up into display mode, and the kids were walking around and physically posting those comments. So I think that's kind of what you were saying in the question is, how do you use your space and have that sort of experience translate across to kids' digital lives and digital footprints? And I think that's, yeah, that's certainly something that you think about with that.
Cool.
Just,
I want to.
oh, sorry. One of my 10th grade students in my Makerspace class, he's been really helping. He's a master at Google SketchUp. It's an unfound skill, and he's just been taken off with it, which has been really great. But he just shared that video of your flip-up tables with me and the director, saying that he wants to incorporate them into the furniture that he's helping design for the new school space.
Cool.
So yeah, that was really cool that he found you guys. One of the questions I'm really interested in is, as our school, especially at the secondary level, moves towards incorporating these flex spaces, these breakout spaces, more where we're going to make learning way more visible to the stakeholders of the school, especially the other students. What did your school do as far as scaffolding for the cultural shift that needs to happen at both a teacher level, administrative level, and a student level? Because the relationships start to change, in my opinion, once you start incorporating that type of learning and pedagogy into a school where, you know, it's normally been very didactic, but now we're going to start to try to democratize it and make it way more lattice structure. Can you guys speak to that kind of cultural shift that you saw happen, the highs and the lows?
Sure.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest reflections we've had, we're now about 3 years into the process of change in terms of space, is that we probably didn't plan and support teacher development well enough along the way. And because one of the things we worked out is that you're always going to have those lighthouse teachers, those early adopters, and then there's the good chunk of people in the middle, and then there's your other guys at the other end. And we really reflected this year that as we went along, we were obviously early adopters ourselves, and we assumed that mindset for everyone in some regard. And so that's something we could have planned for and done better with. Having said that, I'd balance it with people surprised us as well. There were a lot of teachers who we thought were quite traditional and and set in their ways, if you will. And they were some of the first people to say, I don't need a desk anymore in my classroom, and they tossed it out into the hallway, and had the workers come take it away. So there were nice surprises along the way. However, I think our recommendation would be to put in lots of staff development, lots of conversations, and making sure that you're bringing that middle and everyone with you, bringing everyone with you.
We really made an attempt when we did launch it, because we had a teacher committee, so we really did seek feedback within our own student body. We really always tried to couch everything with, it's not what you want as a teacher, it's what what pedagogy says and what a team says, and it's not a personal, like, I want this type of table because I like that. It's like, no, it was about creating equity within our classrooms as well, in the sense that our students, no matter what class they were in, had the same access. If it's a high school discipline, all the science classes would have, it doesn't matter if you get Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. What's-her-name, everyone's going to get the same opportunities. It's not like this guy's got a great space and this person has a really kind of old-looking, tired space that just doesn't function well. One of the things we used to have was kind of this great garage sale. Every year at the beginning of the year, people would throw out the stuff they didn't want, and so returning teachers knew this. They'd go and hoard the good stuff, and the new teacher, the new faculty member who just joined that year, basically got the leftovers. So we really wanted to create equity, was one of the real goals of it. But one of the things we did when we were launching this, after we got all that feedback, Jill and I worked very hard with, we had some parent volunteers come in with an architect and a designer who gave up some of their time, color specialists. We worked with local manufacturers. Obviously, being in China, there's beautiful Chinese furniture, so we worked with them. So when we started to get the key elements in place, the visuals, one of the things we really did was we created a kind of gallery, an area where people could interact with some of these new resources to try and build a little bit of excitement within our faculty as well. For some people, we'll be saying, because one of the things that we said was, like, you're going to lose some of your old storage space. You need to clean out. If someone's been in a room 10 years, they might just have a bunch of junk. And they may not know it's junk, but they will a year later because they won't miss it at all. But there was a lot of kind of people feeling nervous, over the summer. I've got to get everything down off the walls because they're doing the treatment to the walls. I got to get everything out of these cupboards because they're going to take this cupboard away. So there was that stress point. So we really tried to build excitement as well. We really wanted to try and make this seem like it was fun. You're getting something new. It's going to work better for you. And I think that was a win as well. I think that did help the process.
It's really that change management part, and change is stressful. And if you're shaking things up for teachers, it can be a real pressure point for them. And so, we tried to be as compassionate as we could be, but at the end of the day, it was a matter of all those cupboards are going, and there's a deadline. You have to get that done by the end of the school year. So, yeah, I think it worked out okay, but definitely invest in that sort of forward thinking in terms of supporting staff.
The other thing I've heard about that change management type stuff on that topic, we talk about early adopters versus the kind of middle group. I think it's defined by those 5 kind of groups or 7 groups. And what you need to do is kind of identify key figures in each of those groups. And I've often heard the early adopter can't convince the person who's the 5th person down the rung. You need people to move within one step. So if you can identify key people within those steps that are shifting or not, they can, like, I can't rationalize with someone in some ways that doesn't believe in it at all, because we're just on a different level. But if someone is in a place where they a few months ago didn't agree with it and now have moved, it's identifying those people within the framework of your school as well who can relate.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try something to share a YouTube video. Now wait a second, I did this before. Now I'm just kind of making a fool of myself, which is possible on here, and now I'm not seeing the option there. Let me see if I can find. Does anyone know how to do that? Hold on just a second. Oh, well, I'll eat my words then. In the other, is your camera mobile? Would you be able to kind of give us a 360 of your space there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
He's tidying up now. Here, do you want to?
Yeah. So this is the space kind of as it's kind of constructed at the moment. So we can see over here we kind of have a soft seating area. Back here is kind of a wall of whiteboards. One of the key things is these wall spaces that we have that are pinnable. Gone are the traditional display boards, and instead, the nice thing about this is when nothing's on it, it's just a wall. So often display boards, people feel they have to fill it and then they just leave it there. But we're quite happy to start new units or new sections of the year with nothing on it. Over here, kind of another seating area. I don't know if you can see that. Over here, this is a really simple thing that any school could kind of do, and that's just build out the window ledges. I don't know if you see that with the light.
Yeah, it looks great.
And that's just that kind of coffee bar. And in some ways, that acts as a very simple example of how to create kind of an introverted space. The students are facing out, looking out into nature, and that gives them some kind of opportunity to just have a bit of a quiet space for reflection. All the tables are a writable surface. The gentleman was talking earlier about a display mode. So our tables, and I think you're referencing that before, Joe.
Yeah, those are the ones that my student found. Those are really cool.
And even simple things like this coffee table has a glass top as well, so we could write on that. Students sit around that and work collaboratively there as well.
So this is your 4th grade classroom, yeah?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So in a lot of ways, people come to it and say, it looks like it's you often have parents come and say, it looks like a office space or something. It's got quite a sophisticated design, and it's, when it comes to colors and things like that, we really work with the color specialists, and our key kind of theory moving forward was that the students really bring the color. If you look at the room, we had these beautiful red, maroon kind of terrazzo floors, and this wing, we have these wings that go down out of the school, and this wing is the red wing, so hence the red color wall. And then everything else is just kind of tones of gray, because we wanted a kind of muted tone where students work, the products of learning became the color of the students themselves. We don't wear uniforms at WAB, so students do, they dress the part. We have some eccentric kids that wear top hats to class, and which is great fun. So they really do bring the color.
You were saying people think that this looks like an office space a lot. Is that what you said? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I think just the kind of, it's a mature looking space. It doesn't have kind of primary colors blasting everywhere. It doesn't have, it doesn't look like the furniture doesn't look like it's children's furniture. I think that's often the thing that people think is like, oh, we're gonna have children's furniture. It's gonna be primary colors. This looks like a space that an adult could be comfortable in. I think it's also valuing our learners as mature individuals. This is our upper years classrooms that have this look. Our lower years classrooms, while still being not that very kiddie look, is a bit more age appropriate as well. It's still looking, it's not looking like an office. I wouldn't say it looks like an office. That's just kind of sometimes what a parent might say. But it's a mature looking space. It values our learners as mature young people. I think students are, young learners are so much more mature and advanced than perhaps people were 40 years ago, 30 years ago. There's a broader sense of the world. So I think it values them as intelligent young people.
Mm-hmm.
So I noticed in your blog you talked about a lot of other aspects about the effect of sensory and learning, and one of the things you talked about was light. Looking around your classroom wall space, I can definitely see these kind of thinking moves in action on the wall so that the kids know when they go back to that space. Have you ever heard of, or have you ever tried out using lighting itself as a way of kind of like precognition for kids? Like you come in the room and this kind of lighting's on, and that signals that it's going to be kind of this kind of environment today.
Yeah, well, when I first did my pilot class, I had some alternative lighting in here, and we're still moving towards getting some different types of light sources in these spaces. There's kind of a second phase to this project. The one thing we realized when redoing a class is that it's hard to do everything in one fell swoop. We were staying till 7, 8 o'clock at night daily for a few months, making minute decisions. And at a certain point, we just said we can't make them all. And so now we're kind of in a second phase of adding some alternative light options. I'm not sure if you're familiar with, speaking of kind of setting the mood in certain lighting, one company, Philips, produces lights called hue lights. And they have a whole theory and system. So they have lights that are, concentration lighting. And, I mean, you can set it to purple, green, red. But they also do have preset filters that you can do. It's all kind of run through a smartphone. And you can basically set kind of color for a certain type of waking up, or whether it's relaxing, or whether it's concentration or discussion, but they have all these preset colors. So we have not experimented with that, but we're very aware of it and would love an opportunity to. We just haven't moved to that point personally yet.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Have you guys had any opportunity with that type of?
We have a global classroom that was built. I started building it last year, and then it was constructed this year. And it's just kind of it's 4 giant projectors that go across one giant kind of 180-degree screen. And as soon as they started building it, the director started courting other companies. So all of a sudden, Samsung jumped in and donated a video wall. It just became like overkill on the tech in the room. Steelcase donated 25 of their Node chairs, which are pretty cool as well. Your equipment looks really similar to some Steelcase stuff as well. And then Philips was supposed to donate the hue lights, so that was supposed to come, but then something happened with management within Philips, and we're still kind of waiting for that part to come. But the idea was to kind of create this, as you're talking about, this ability to control all the sensories, so that you walk in the room and the teacher could have presets for lighting, you could have a surround sound system, and we've really just started playing around with some of the, fancier capabilities just this week, where we have kids come in and do these massive observations and immersions into an environment, and it's largely just using one giant image with a few animations and things, but just to have them kind of, their sound when they come in. But the lighting aspect would be a really cool thing to experiment with in the future, so that you could come into a space and just completely change like ambiance from beginning to end of the lesson.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of those things that we've also talked about. We run a thing called at the end of the PYP, they run an exhibition, and so a couple years ago, one of the groups had just convinced the school that they should move from traditional incandescent bulbs to an LED lighting system. So the school had just literally invested in all these brand new LED lights. So we were kind of at a point, at least at that time, that when we were first redesigning the classrooms, that we were going to say, we're going to keep these lights. We've literally just purchased them. So I think that may be something over time that we revisit as well, getting some kind of built-in system. I think if we went and got hue lights or something like that now, it would be kind of less on a whole room scale and more on kind of floor lamp kind of idea.
Yeah. It's fascinating the way you described it, though, Chris, like the idea of space and all elements of space, including lighting, working as a provocation and as an interest point for kids, and as a nonverbal cue to promote thinking or to tune them into it's this part of the lesson. So this is what it feels like. This is what it looks like. That's a fascinating idea. So thank you.
I think also. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like you guys have hit on so many important key points, this connection of time, the human element of pedagogy, and the reference to that this has happened before, that in the 70s, I actually went to school when we had open classrooms, no walls in the classroom at all, kind of age note there. And it was a complete disaster because, what I think it is, looking back, it's kind of the same problems we're having now with our tech integration, where we're not seeing the payback of all the tech integration, in testing scores or whatever the criteria they're measuring that with. But it's mainly because we're just getting to know this stuff. We're talking about tech tools that demand for kind of teaching methods that teachers may not be very comfortable with. It's a kind of complete shock to them. So this revisit to the open classroom system, I hope that we know more now and that we're more apt to use it in intelligent ways, or I think we'll quickly be back at the regimented, efficient, linear time production unit of student learning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the thing is, I think we're at a place just design and architecturally where, when open plan was done initially, it was literally like that was the only option. And I think now, I've gone and visited some schools where they can open up a space to house 200 people, or they can break that space up with different types of tracks and walls and things into quite small spaces. So yeah, and I think we have a new design project going on that also has that kind of functionality. So you can have, you can have a big space that can house 60 kids. You can redivide the space in the space that requires 20 kids. So I think it's about having. We're at a different place now than just saying open plan. Let's just leave it kind of. It's that flexibility again. It comes back to.
You guys have an incredible. Sorry, I'm going to jump in there real fast. Just building on that, is that you guys have an incredible curation of material on your Twitter account. The Twitter feed has excellent stuff. Your blog as well. Where else do you go? I mean, like I look at Notosh has been an inspiration. The D School has some incredible design ideas. The book Make Space, the book The Third Teacher. Where do you guys go for inspiration on ideas or philosophical guidance on planning space?
Design share.
Yeah, I mean we're big into design in general. So for teaching stuff, there's Design Share is a great resource. Fielding McNair put that out. But also, I take inspiration from all types of design sources. So I'm regularly following Design Boom or DZine or any of those types of design magazines or online outputs, because a lot of the ideas, the one thing that I wrote about, Dylan wrote the article, like, there's no real empirical proof that learning spaces are making a difference at this point. And this doesn't come from us. This comes from statements by top academics in the field. But there is, I then wrote kind of another piece saying, but in design in general, there are some things that just matter. If you don't have clean air in your space, it doesn't matter whether you're in a learning space or in another space. You need to have clean air. We need to have light. People don't want to be, literally in a cave. So I think there are things that really matter, and they're undeniable. So I think it's about using those elements. But when it comes to inspiration, I think you've got to take it from all sources. And that's the exciting thing about it, is there's constant new innovations going on, whether it's in schools or offices or any place.
I think, well, maybe to add to that, within the world of education, I'm very influenced by like the Reggio Emilia approach to early childhood. Which is where the idea of the environment as the third teacher comes from, and the idea that space does matter, that it's as important as the student's voice and as the adult's voice in the room, and that you can manipulate space, just as you were saying before. You change the lighting, and it will have an effect, and it's a valuable thing. It may not be something you can measure, as you were saying, empirically at this point, but it's more than a belief in some ways, and I think it's a philosophy. It's something that people refer to in their daily practice, and I think good teachers understand it, whether they can express it and it's explicit to them. But when you see a good teacher in a good learning environment, you know that they're considering space. So
I think it's a real benefit too, because the educator considers space, but also as a student, because as lifelong learners, it's important for students to understand where they learn. And I think that's one of the big conversations that has happened since we've redeveloped these spaces, that students are beginning to have an awareness of what types of spaces are useful for a certain given task. So we'll talk with students about reconfiguring the layout of the classroom. And I think that's a really important skill. Like, I know personally, like, I love to go and work at a loud coffee shop, do report. My wife cannot be in that type of environment, but you need to have that kind of understanding. That's one of the things that we're hoping to help our students understand about themselves, is where is the best place for them to learn.
Well, and it's sorry.
Yeah, I could say that's like one of the things that you can measure right away is how are the students getting that metacognition part of things, just from the thinking that you've done about the space and how the space can affect the way they learn. But one thing that some of you touched on before was look, innovation might not be happening at schools, yet the skills and stuff that we want our kids to develop for the future are happening somewhere else. So like all these critical thinking and collaboration and all of that 21st century skills that we cannot if I don't want to say like explicitly measure, like they're hard to measure. How do you measure good collaboration or effective collaboration or critical thinking? Those things are not measurable just with a stick or anything like that, or just a quiz. It won't tell you how well our students can collaborate. But those things that we want them to do, or that we expect them to do at the end, are things and skills that are valued in different contexts. So if you look at like new companies like Google offices, all these sorts of entrepreneurship kind of thing, they are fostering these new spaces, innovative spaces where people can want to go and work and want to go and innovate and collaborate and be together and think in different ways. So I think bringing those elements into school really has a big impact. And you can tell from what you just said, like the fact that your students are realizing that they're good or they work better in these type of environments, or is already telling us something. So like you could say you can go look for inspiration in those types of places and then bring them back to school. If those are the skills that we want them to have for the future, that's a way that we should go to. And think about it, those spaces like there are famous by now for being innovative and creative do not look anything at all like the traditional school does.
I think one of the things, if you do want to go, there is a lot of schools that do have really dynamic spaces. I'm totally in agreement with you. But the one thing about the schools is the Google and those types of places, it's super easy to find information about those places. But there's a lot of schools that have really dynamic spaces. So, if you're looking at one place also to get inspiration, is like, when you go to PD, when you go to a conference, talk to the people at schools, because a lot of schools they may not have redone a whole campus, but they might have done a room. I mean, what Chris, you were talking about, there's a lot of cool stuff going on in schools. We just don't have the marketing machine that maybe big business does. So that's one great place for inspiration too, is when you visit a school, talk to them about their space, talk to them what they're doing, talk to them about the way they're designing their timetable or the different considerations that are going into the way their new playground might be. There's a lot of different things happening at schools, and that's a really great resource too, is just your colleagues.
Well, I'm looking just at your space that you have right there, and it looks like one of the first things that we had some teachers do at the beginning of the year was redesign their space, thinking about how could we make this space show kids thinking on the walls. We talked to Owen Lenihan. I don't know if you know this guy, an Irish guy that's in Germany. And he's got some really cool ideas about using the wall space, which looks like are very active in your classroom as well. These tweaks could be done in any classroom. This is something you don't need a bunch of fancy equipment for, the fancy Philips lights or whatever, that it's making the walls approachable, it's using the space in interactive ways, it's leaving the kid space to go between that cave. If you look at Thornburg, he has the 4 metaphors, which you talk about as well, the secret spaces, having that cave encapsulation time, but then going back and forth between your campfire and your watering holes as well. And then as far as building on what Diego was saying, this idea that like this is the learning we want to happen, and where are we being pushed into those areas? And I'm looking at, I don't know the PYP system very well, so I can't reference it. I love your feedback, but there's a 21st Century Learning site that talks about a lot of these skills and gives ways to assess them. The new ISTE Student Standard Draft that is accessible online but should be published this summer, really unpacks like design thinking, makerspace, collaborative learning, and then Henry Jenkins' new literacies. If you look at those, there's some great, they're not standards, they're just sort of the new literacies, but one of them is collective intelligence, the ability of kids to create together and build from each other. It seems to me that these spaces and these tweaks are the beginning building blocks of those skills. So then those kids grow up, and to build on a wiki and to take someone's comment and then make it better. Hopefully what we're going to see is just a smarter use of the social platform itself. But like I said, I think that really starts with connecting these purposeful thinking moves, or these purposeful habits of mind and behaviors with the spaces that you're designing in the class.
Yeah, Chris, I think some of the things that we're mentioning and talking about right there, I think speak to and Nathaniel, and thank you guys for talking about this 1970s reiteration of the open classroom. We talked a little bit about that in my school, and one of my pushbacks was this idea that Chris was just talking about, in that the way that knowledge and communication is what I don't know if you guys are familiar with Bill Cope and Mary Kalanitz. They're professors at the University of Illinois. They have a new learning kind of theory, and they say the knowledge and communication architectures are very different today when we're talking about this move to this 21st century world, whatever buzzword we want to throw out there, right? And I think one of the failures of the 70s was the open classroom model was something that was imposed upon teaching from the top down by architects and a very few kind of forward-thinking superintendents, right? And now, as we've moved into this 21st century world, the knowledge and communication has changed, and it has caught up to these design principles that we thought might be good pedagogically 40 years ago, but the world wasn't there yet. We were still kind of structured in a very hierarchical way. And now that we've flattened it or made it horizontal and lattice, I think we're seeing, maybe not empirically, but we're seeing the pedagogy and the space kind of find this nice synthesis that might not have been there. Well, probably it wasn't there because it was a complete failure, right, 40 years ago.
I think total agreement with you, Joe. I think it's such a great point. Is that when we even redesigned these spaces, we didn't have the luxury of taking down walls and but again, we were actually catching the space up to what the teaching was. And I think in the past, what was happening was in the 70s, we were instead trying to say we'll make the space transform the teaching. And I think we're now at a place with the teaching and the learning is this is the way that. So one of the cool things that we've found is since we've redone the space is making the walls this approachable space and making it really easy to write everywhere and show your thinking. We've actually stepped away slightly from technology. Not that we don't still use it as a daily tool, but there were things before that we were having to do digitally because we physically couldn't do them. And now we're able to do those things in the physical space, and it's so easy for teachers to do it. It's like they can see the resource right in front of them. That we found that some of the tools we were using before digitally, we've just replaced by actually doing it, and it's made a really big difference. But I think that's because we're in this place where the classrooms hadn't changed since like 1880, and technology, like when we've gone to Learning Spaces conferences, always still talk about the virtual space, and that's great. But there's also hundreds of conferences a year that talk about technology. Big fan of technology, but I think the physical space is the part that's really having to catch up. I think you're exactly right. Is like we're ready now for the next step. We're ready. If we do open plan or some kind of version of open plan, I think it's because our teachers are ready to do it. If we're all going to go in and want quiet all the time, or we're going to want a certain traditional style teaching, it's not going to work. So you need to have the staff and the school culture and the community that's going to work within that open plan design. I think when it doesn't work in office spaces because you have people who are, that really enjoyed their cubicle. So it doesn't work.
Well, interesting. It seems to me like the big block is this standardized testing. I mean, we're talking about wanting to talk about all these larger learning outcomes that don't get covered in standardized testing. And yet the biggest, strongest argument for standardized testing is that it's the equalizer. That it really reveals, which schools are failing, and then getting resources into those schools or closing them down or whatever needs to be done. And so I think the danger is that, we have all these beautiful images of what learning should be, which I think most teachers would share, and yet to back away from the standardized testing is really to kind of let these inequalities run rampant. Then you really have like some schools that are connecting their pedagogy with their spatial design and creating all these beautiful things, and you have some schools that are completely left behind. I'm no fan of standardized testing, except that I am very concerned about that kind of gap. We all work in very innovative spaces in the international schools that allow us to do these things. Yet if I were to go back to the States and work in a public school, who knows what I would be walking into and what kind of restraints would be surrounding me. So I agree with you. Like, I think we're in this time where like we have to make this show that this thing really works, and the criteria that's judging whether these spaces are successful is probably not the right criteria. We're probably talking about standardized measurements as opposed to doing things like what Making Learning Visible at Project Zero, where they have a whole system for documentation of learning and showing all the larger learning outcomes. So I just throw one last thing out there, and that is the video you guys showed is amazing. This kind of stop frame motion of moving your classroom through the different design spaces. What I would love for you to do, if you're allowed to do it, is to stop frame your classroom and actually show how kids are using this space, and especially when cool things are going to be happening, to show those kind of like spatial arrangements. That's super cool for us to see, just to see how ideas for tweaking and managing our classrooms.
Yeah, it's something we consider. It's a good idea for sure. I'll definitely think about that and see what we can come up with. That'd be great.
I don't know what your schedule is. I'm more than happy to keep going, but what do you guys have on the plate today?
We're just about done, I think, unfortunately. We have to come in soon, unfortunately. I mean, not unfortunately. I mean, we're looking forward to seeing them.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely keep up with you guys on your blog, on your website, and like I said, your Twitter feed is great. Like that, just flipping through that was like collecting a ton of ideas. We have a Google community that we're building called Hacking Active Learning Spaces. I invite you to it. Please join, contribute if you want, or pull ideas from there. A lot of the things we talked about are on there as well, but also a lot of things that you guys have been adding, we've been throwing on there too.
Great.
Cool. Well, have a lovely Tuesday morning there in Beijing, and I hope we connect again soon. Thank you very much for walking us through all that.
Great, and really thank you for having us. It was really a lot of fun to connect with you guys and hear some of the things that are going on in your schools.
Yeah, thanks very much, guys. Nice to meet you guys.
Cool.
Nice to meet you, everyone. Thank you, Knight. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.